You're listening to A Deeper Dive, a part of the Winsight Podcast Network.
Consumers are increasingly questioning the value of their restaurant visits. Hello, this is Jonathan Mays, Editor-in-Chief of Restaurant Business, and in this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, I speak with Lisa Miller, a consumer strategist and author, and we talk a lot about consumer attitudes on the value of restaurants right now. Lisa is the author of The Business of Joy and surveys consumers every month. She has had some interesting insights on consumers' views on the industry's value. We talk extensively about tipping and what consumers think about tipping at the moment. A growing number of diners are frustrated with tipping, and we talk about why that is. We also talk about consumers' views on whether their restaurants' visits are worth it. An increasing number of consumers think their visits aren't worth what they're spending, and more than half of fast food customers say they get sticker shock when they visit a restaurant. We also talk about what restaurants can do to make their offering more worth it to consumers. Hint, do not skimp on the training budget. It is a fascinating conversation on consumer attitudes, so please have a listen. Okay, I am here with Lisa Miller. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
All right, cool. Lisa, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do.
So I am a consumer insight strategist, and basically I'm one of those people that does consumer surveys to unlock growth for companies. Been doing it for quite a while.
Oh, yeah? So what kind of company do you work for traditionally?
So I have my own company right now for the last 15 years, but prior to that, I was the head of innovation at Brinker Restaurants. Mm-hmm. And then prior to Brinker, I was actually the head of consumer research at Frito-Lay PepsiCo.
Okay. So do you traditionally, the companies that you work for, like traditionally restaurants or all kind of consumer companies?
Well, right now I do a little bit. Restaurants is definitely the sweet spot of what I do, but I also do some financial services and big box retailers as well.
All right, cool. So I want to ask, so you've got some pretty interesting insights into sort of the state of the consumer. And you were at the Restaurant Finance Conference, and probably the biggest takeaway that I got out of that is that the consumer increasingly does not think that their visit to a fast food restaurant is worth it. Actually, a lot of them don't think their visit to restaurants, period, is worth it. But tell us a little bit about that. What's going on?
Well, so I do 1,000 surveys every month to try to keep a pulse of what's going on, not only in the restaurant business, but just the macro economy in general. And basically the consumers are, pulling back on their restaurants, not only just because of price, but it's just not worth it anymore. And when the value equation is pretty much just upside down right now, we know that restaurants, both QSR and full service, have been taking a lot of price, but they're not really adding value to the top of that value equation. So consumers are just kind of tapping out, just saying it's not worth it anymore. So It's not good.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you take a look, and this is, it's like you just do the math and you take a look at since 2019 and fast food prices have gone up in the neighborhood of 30%. And some chains a lot more than that, by the way. But so 30% since 2019, which basically on a $30 visit is going to cost you $38. You do a few of those over the course of the year, and that's some real money. But that to me is not everything that consumers are paying, because they are also more likely to pay tips on top of that. Now, McDonald's and Burger King are not charging tips, but you are paying them at like places like Starbucks and certainly a lot of fast casual companies. So you're far more likely to pay tips today than you were 3 years ago. You're paying higher prices. It's reasonable for a consumer to sit there and ask, why am I doing this all the time? And we see more and more evidence that they're increasingly saying we're not doing this as much, because of it.
Well, and definitely, and, I always talk about, you probably heard in the session when I say, whether you have this conversation with a spouse, a coworker, or sometimes you even just have it in your head. It's like, what do you feel like today? I don't know. What do you feel like? And you go back, and if you're bantering with another person, you banter back and forth. But even if you're in your head, you're trying to decide where you want to go by yourself. How much time do I have? how much money is in my pocket? What do I feel like? But what's happening is that pause. I mean, we've all been there. It's like, okay, am I going to get that screen turned around and then ask for a tip? And what's happening is people are beginning to feel obligated. And that's where it kind of falls apart. Where I'll tell you, and I might have even shared this story. I literally was at a local coffee shop, reached down to the cold case to just get a bottle of water. And I swear this employee like turned that tip around. And I'm like, wait a minute, I literally just grabbed a bottle of water in a coffee shop and you're asking me to tip? And so I think that those moments is what people remember, that moment of awkwardness. And if it's good service and you feel like they deserve it, great. But don't make people feel obligated. And it comes to that frequency play. And I think it's definitely really impacting it.
Yeah. Yeah. I have come to the rapid conclusion that tipping in the United States has gotten out of hand. And it's too much, and it's not just, again, to the point, it's not the fact that, I like to be able to reward good service as a customer. Absolutely. If I get really good service, I have zero personal problem with giving them some extra money because I'm happy. I think that, that person for that short little bit of time has developed a relationship with you and that sort of thing, and you want to really reward them for their work. I have zero problem with that at all. But the problem is that tipping, to your point, has become sort of an obligation. And the best example of this has come recently when DoorDash has now started to put a warning on orders to say that if you don't leave a tip, you're less likely to get your food on time.
Oh my gosh.
Such a problem. It's at that point. It's not just an obligation. I mean, that's, at that particular point, that's, that they're almost holding your food hostage until to get a tip. That's just asinine.
I actually, that came out right before RFDC. And I got to tell you, I did share a post about that and it blew up because people are so incensed by that. I understand the goal to try to be transparent. Everybody's like, air quote, let's be transparent. And the reality of it is, the sad reality of it is, that is actually what they're saying is true in the sense that the driver actually does know up front if you get a tip. So what's happening is the operator, and you may already know this, but there's so many orders that are sitting at restaurants not getting picked up. So they're sitting there for 20, 30 minutes because there's no driver to pick it up. And so the restaurants are actually getting kind of screwed over on that because they're having to remake the order. The customers are unhappy. So it's kind of this doom loop. But I always talk about, my mom even said, it's not what you say, but how you say it. The way they said it was just like firing your customers. Like, okay, let's just hold it, like if you don't tip, then your food's never going to get delivered or, maybe 30 minutes and it may already be cold anyway. So I think it's just a really bad situation that just got amplified with that language, and they're air quote testing it. But oh my goodness, it is. I felt like, your food is hostage for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's like the thing is supposed to be, it should be, again, if it's a reward for your service, then it should come after the order. And I think that one of the issues that I think that we're seeing with the consumer is that the tip is no longer given after, with the advent of mobile ordering and delivery, the tip isn't given after you're done with the order. It's actually given before. And, that's actually true with like Starbucks and some of these other companies that take mobile orders, is that they'll ask you, do you want to add a tip right away? Rather than, maybe after the order is done, that you can reflect the better service. And really that's when these prompts need to come. But I think that what this does to the consumer base, getting kind of circling back to the impact on restaurants, is that it I always say that the issue is you really should probably be as consumer friendly as you humanly can. And the state of where we're at with pricing and with tips and the way tips are going is that it's less and less customer friendly. It's more likely to be confusing and more expensive, certainly for a lot of customers.
Well, and when you think about the survey that I did just 2 weeks ago, I went deep into tipping. And the reality of it is 80% of Americans basically said, that they're okay tipping for better service. So how do you, if you tip ahead of a time, you don't know. But it's not the point that people don't want to tip. It's exactly what you said. It's the order in which it's being asked. Now, the people at Starbucks and these other companies, they're smart people. But so I know what happened is they're like, if I'm doing a mobile order, I don't want to add friction at the end of the order pickup. And so let's go ahead and put that tip at the front so I can just grab my coffee and I don't have to talk to anybody. So, and, grab and go. And so I get that, right? So I get the fact that they can do it. So the concept made sense to make that order pickup easier, but then it messes up the whole the hospitality part of it. Because number one, now I'm not talking to anybody. Number two, do I really need to tip for a transaction? Because that's what it is now. If I do a mobile order, it's a transaction. It's not a connection where does it warrant service? And so that's where I can logically see how we got here. But at the end of the day, even consumers, about 60% of consumers say they're willing to help tip to help servers earn a living wage. So again, the desire is there, but when it becomes a transaction, that's where consumers are like, hang on, hold on a minute. That's not what I signed up for.
Yeah. So consumers are pretty frustrated with the status of tipping at this point. Yeah, that was your big conclusion from that survey.
Absolutely. They are so frustrated. And not only are they frustrated, it impacts the next decision. Because when you might remember, I like to play the little quiz games in the session there. And, 52% of fast food users in the last month basically are frustrated. They have sticker shock with their order price. And it's surprisingly lower with casual dining, but at least with casual dining, you are getting a service experience. But when literally half of the customers are leaving with sticker shock, it goes something like this. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Well, let's go here. Well, last time, boy, that food wasn't so good, or maybe the service was slow. And then, oh my God, do you remember how much it cost? It wasn't worth it. And boom, you are off the list. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy right now that traffic is down. It's not that consumers don't want to go out to eat. It's that restaurants are not providing what customers really want.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I think one of your points is that consumers will spend money on they absolutely will. They will spend money on restaurants. They clearly will. And we see all kinds of data to show that. But they really want something. They want to make sure they want that money to be well spent.
And it has to be worth it. It has to be worth it.
Mm-hmm. And if they're not, and if it's not, they're gonna reject it. That's actually, we go into a period like this, like historically, when consumers have tight budgets, they will absolutely pick and choose winners and losers. And you see that over and over again. You have no margin for error in the restaurant business in a period like that. So you can have, Chipotle during the Great Recession thrive. People loved it. And
right.
You saw all sorts of companies actually do very well during the Great Recession, but you had a lot of companies that filed for bankruptcy and all sorts of other challenges and stuff like that. So, the onus is on restaurant companies in a time like this to absolutely get everything right and make sure that they're proper value.
Without a doubt. And what I will tell folks out there, for operators listening to this, is where's your next best dollar spent? It's in training your staff, because I asked a question around, that willingness to pay for service versus like, are we moving to this world of transactions? And it was almost a 2x variable, Jonathan, where it's like people are 2 times more likely to say, I want more service, not less service. And so what's happening is that if we go down this transactional path, the food becomes commoditized. And what happens is, you have brands, but what'll happen is brands become products, and a burger is a burger and a pizza is a pizza. And yeah, maybe the ingredients are different or whatever. But if it becomes so transactional, we're working on products, and then you lose the ability for premium pricing because everything becomes the same when it's a cold burger delivered to your house, right? It's just it's not worth it.
Right. Right. So what kind of things do you think of restaurants, like speaking particularly to fast food restaurants, what kind of things do you think would restaurants better spend their time and effort on to make their restaurants more worth it to the consumer?
Yeah. So we asked literally a list of 27 different things that we asked straight up. What can restaurants do to make it worth it? And we asked for quick serve and we asked for full serve separately. And so this whole notion of affordable pricing for quality meals was the top of the list. Now, there are 2 important things in there. Affordable, it doesn't mean cheap. It means affordable. But quality is a really, really important thing. The next thing on the list was actually consistency of quality and taste. And what I find is that this kind of notion of the industry, particularly fast food, consistently inconsistent. And I hear when I talk to consumers qualitatively in focus groups and one-on-one interviews, they've lost trust that the food is going to be good. And that is tragic, right? And so if you're not consistently delivering that quality and that taste, then if it costs a lot of money, I don't really want to risk that. So affordable quality meals, number 1 and number 2, but not surprising. Yes, people still want value offers and discounts and things like that. But then right underneath of that for number 4 was just high quality ingredients. So 3 out of the top 4, all about delivering quality, consistent meals. I know it sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but it is this idea, we talked about it in the session, shoring up the core. It really is just this back to basics on operations. Clean is really important. People don't want dirty restrooms. They've got to have clean. But I will tell you, and this is something, if people remember one thing and one thing only from this, friendly, attentive service was statistically higher than prompt, efficient service.
Yeah.
So in QSR, it's all about, speed of service. I got to get that, through the drive-through line. I've got to make it shorter. I got to carve off 10 seconds. The reality of it is, are operators spending enough time to really deliver friendly, attentive service and employees that care? Because friendly, attentive is statistically higher at driving worth it than prompt, efficient service.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge, right? That goes back to commoditization.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. So much of the industry focuses on speed and I don't know, as somebody with no attention span, I can actually appreciate that. However, you take a look let's throw this completely random restaurant chain out, Chick-fil-A. You might have heard of them. And, that's or you could do Chick-fil-A and you could do In-N-Out, 2 perfect examples, or Culver's, 3 chains. I would not put those 3 restaurant chains are not fast. You can debate among yourself about whether you can get higher quality food. You can certainly, I would argue that you can get probably, a number of places where you can get a better chicken sandwich than Chick-fil-A. For instance, plenty of places that you can get just as good a burger that you do at In-N-Out. So, none of them are fast, but what they're known for is really friendly, attentive service. They get the little things absolutely right. Again, they're all actually pretty slow, some of them. You go to In-N-Out, man, you're waiting a long time.
It's because they have lines that nobody else has sometimes.
They do. Well, yeah, they do have lines, and they end up to be slow, and people are waiting in the lines.
Because
the lines, we could probably talk a lot about lines probably feed in on itself, because the worst thing that you could have is like an empty restaurant. But
that's my point, right? Is they have slow tickets, not because they're slow. It's because they're busy, because people are willing to wait for it because it's worth it. So it all goes back to that.
Slow. I mean, they're not. It's not. That's not their main point, I guess, is they're not trying to just churn you out. You don't feel, even though these are fast food restaurants with drive-throughs and all that other stuff, you don't really feel like they're trying to churn you through. You feel as a customer, especially at Chick-fil-A, that they care about your well-being, and that for that moment, even though it really is a quick service restaurant, they're paying attention to you when you go through the drive-through and things like that. That matters. And the numbers on all of those chains absolutely back this up.
Without a doubt. And the reality of it is, as you know, I talk about joy and the business of joy. And at the end of the day, I heard Andrew Cathy speak, and he basically said, and it's kind of a tricky statement, but he goes, cared for people, care for people. And so what he's saying is, cared for people, he cares for his employees. And because he cares for his employees, they care for the customers. And so that's why I literally believe is, think of all the money that has been spent on digitization, technology, this race for all, and a lot of it is this herd mentality. I ask people to raise their hand. How many of you have invested more in training versus where you are in 2019? Maybe 2 hands raised up. Yeah. And if you think about those dollars being spent, somehow there's got to be a better balance. Training is the first budget. Training and marketing are the 2 budgets that in tough economic times get cut. And in today's world, the training budgets, those are the things that should be held sacred, to say you not only should not cut those, it's more important. One of the frustrations we didn't talk about yet is employees not being well trained. The consumers are noticing the fact that now we might not have, we still get complaints on the frustrations of not enough staff, but what's coming up is they're not trained. And so then your orders can be wrong. Your customization requests could be wrong. Items are left out because the employees aren't trained. And then, gosh, you've seen all the viral videos that go out there. Sure, we know that those are thankfully few and far between, but there are some really not good things happening from an employee. When customers get treated poorly, man, it goes viral. Yeah.
It's not, I think, certainly in the investor world, or, in the consumer, it's not, operations aren't exciting. It's not really sexy. It's but operations absolutely matters. And, on the other side of the operations equation, we talked about Chick-fil-A. Burger King is actually a great example of a company that really struggled. They struggled awfully. And you could point a giant finger directly at their operations, that their operations at too many stores were just not up to snuff. And anybody who'd gone into Burger King, between 2018 and 2022, or even going back further, could show that you just, and to getting that stuff right, just clean restaurants, for crying out loud. Make sure your restaurant is clean.
Well, and like I said, that number 3 was, I think, 5th on the list. It's like literally clean and well maintained. When I do focus groups it was number 5. clean and well-maintained restaurants, people will say, oh, well, that's a whole pandemic thing. Well, no, it's actually kind of go back to a Chipotle E. coli thing, from a while back, that's where food safety and cleanliness has been in the, top of the list, for probably 10 years. But so it's not a COVID safety thing. But if your restaurant is not well maintained, if it's not clean, we all know that really reflects poorly on the food. But I do want to go back to the fact that going back to the restaurants that actually have exceptional service, people will say, well, how do I do that even in a QSR world, in a drive-through world? And, we already talked about Chick-fil-A. But when you think about steps of service, what can you do to make sure that first impression and the last impression of your employee engagement happens with the customer? And yes, all of that in the middle is getting the food produced and again, consistently and consistent right now. But everything that happens in the middle. But how do you think about the first touch point and the last touch point for your customers and making sure they feel cared for? And I think the restaurants that can truly embrace that and prioritize training, I think they're going to be the ones to win during this tough economic challenge. The other thing I would say about training, and I've done some work in higher ed as well, is this digitization of all the training materials, right? Because now it's like, number one, maybe you get handed a handbook. Number two, go do this course online, this video. And so we're training our people through digital video. And so we're transacting with our training instead of teaching them how to connect. This generation of employees, people that are coming up, they just graduated high school, maybe they're still in college. It's difficult for the generation today to even make eye contact because they've been locked down. I am so serious. You laugh.
That's true.
You laugh. But being in lockdown has been a really challenging thing for these 16-year-olds to 20-year-olds. And just the basics of smiling and teaching people how to have eye contact and smile. That is, and yeah, you can say I can hire for that. But at the end of the day, you still have to remind people of these simple human truths that we lost during the pandemic.
Yeah. Spend more money on training. Do not cut your training budget, even though though your earnings are going down. It's probably more important now than ever. Lisa, this was fantastic. Really appreciate you joining me this week on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was super fun.
And that should do it for this week's episode of A Deeper Dive, which was edited, as always, by Spoons. Artwork by Nico Hines. You may find this and other episodes of the podcast on our website at www.restaurantbusinessonline.com/article/deeper-dive. And you may subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Jonathan Mays, your host, podcast producer, and the editor-in-chief of Restaurant Business. Thank you for listening.